Previously on Golden Tales Radio. On a rainy afternoon, I watched an old man walk into my cafe and settle into the farthest corner, with nothing in front of him and no one paying him any attention. I brought him coffee and sat beside him. When he left, he pressed a folded napkin into my hand. That night, alone in the dark cafe, I opened it. There was an address, and one line written beneath it. When this building was first built, I started my dream here. I did not sleep that night. I was up before 5 the next morning. The words on the napkin had not left me. They sat in my chest like something solid, something I could feel when I breathed. I got up, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table, with the napkin in front of me. The address was for a street in Carlisle, a small town about 20 minutes from Mill Creek. A residential street, apartment buildings. I left Megan in charge of the morning rush and got in my car. The drive took 20 minutes. The rain had stopped overnight, and the world outside was pale and washed clean. I drove with the radio off. The building was a 3-story apartment complex on a quiet side street. Paint faded to the color of old paper. Rusted mailboxes at the entrance. Lobby carpet worn through at the center. I found the apartment on the 3rd floor and stood in front of the door. Longer than I needed to. I knocked. The woman who opened it was in her early 50s. Tired looking but alert, wearing a cardigan over a collared shirt. Holding a dish towel as though she had been interrupted in the middle of something ordinary. She looked at me the way you look at someone you have been half expecting. Uncertain, and very still. "Are you from Morning Rose?" she asked. "The cafe on Clement Street?" I said yes. Something shifted in her face. Not quite relief. More like the release of a breath held too long. She stepped back and opened the door wider. "Please come in." The apartment was small and carefully kept. On the bookshelf beside the window, a collection of small framed photographs. I moved toward them without thinking. And there he was, a man I would not have recognized from the photographs alone. Younger, much younger, his hair dark. His face unlined, standing in front of a building I knew instantly. The old brick exterior, the tall windows. The carved stone detail above the doorway. My building. Except in the photograph, the window did not say Morning Rose. It said Kimball's. The woman came to stand beside me. "My father built that building in 1971, she said. He was 34. He did most of the masonry work himself. Her name was Margaret Kimball. Her father was Harold Kimball. She told me his story at her small kitchen table, over tea. She made without asking whether I wanted any. She told it steadily, in the quiet way of someone who has carried something for a long time, and has learned to set it down without breaking. Harold had come to Mill Creek from western Pennsylvania in his late 20s. Newly married, with very little money and a great deal of determination. He had worked in construction, saved carefully, purchased the lot on Clement Street, and built the building himself. 1 floor at a time over several years. The ground floor became Kimball's general store. Hardware, dry goods, bread, produce. A little bit of everything for a neighborhood that needed a place to gather. For nearly 20 years, it was the center of a small world. Harold extended credit quietly and forgave debts he never mentioned again. Children came in after school. Old men sat on the bench outside on summer mornings. I listened and thought of all the mornings I had unlocked that front door. And not known any of this. Then Margaret told me about 1991. A large grocery chain opened nearby. Then another. People drove to the bigger stores. The tabs mounted. Harold tried to adapt, but the regulars aged and moved away. And new families had no reason to choose a small store over a large one. He closed Kimball's in 1994. There was debt. Her mother had become ill. In 1997, he sold the building. After that, he never went back. Not once in almost 30 years. He could not bring himself to stand on that corner and see what had become of the place where he had built something from nothing and watched it come apart. Until the rain came, and he needed somewhere to stand out of it. And the nearest door was mine. I had to put my teacup down. He came home different yesterday, Margaret said, looking at her hands. He's been quiet for years. But last night there was something lighter about him. He said someone brought him coffee and just sat with him. Didn't make a fuss. Just sat. She looked up at me. He said it was the first time in a very long while that someone had treated him like he was worth being next to. I thought of him reaching for those coins. The prepared line about leaving if he was in the way. The hands trembling around the cup. He had been braced for so long. I drove back to Mill Creek slowly. Somewhere on the road between Carlisle and home, I began to cry, not the sudden kind, but the kind that builds quietly behind your ribs, and eventually becomes too much to hold. I thought of all the things I had not known. The man who had laid those walls with his own hands. The store that had stood there for 20 years and fed a neighborhood. The slow, quiet loss of it all. And then the rain, and the door, and a corner table. And no one bothering to look up. That evening I called Margaret. I asked if Harold would be willing to come back to the cafe, not as a customer passing through, but as a guest. The best table. The window seat, where the morning light came in longest. There was a pause. I'll ask him, she said carefully. I can't promise anything. Of course, I said. Just let him know the door is open. She called back 2 days later. He would come on Saturday morning. I was at the cafe before it opened that Saturday. I set the window table myself, fresh flowers, the good mugs. Not the everyday ones. I told Megan what I knew, quietly, and asked her to follow my lead. At 9:15, the door opened. Harold was wearing the same khaki coat. It was clean and pressed, though it was still the coat it had always been. Margaret was beside him, her hand lightly at his elbow. I crossed the cafe and met them at the door. Harold looked at me, and then past me at the room. Quietly, carefully, the way you take in a place you have been turning over in your memory for 30 years. I walked him to the window table. He moved without hurrying. When he reached the chair, he stood for a moment. Before sitting, the way you pause at the edge of something to let yourself feel it fully. He sat. The morning light came through the tall windows and lay across the table in long warm bars. The old brick wall held the light. The tin ceiling, painted over all those times, still pressed and patterned beneath the layers, was visible if you looked. Harold looked. He took in the walls, the shelves, the worn floorboards. He looked slowly, the way you look at something you thought you had lost. Half afraid it will not be as you remembered, and half stunned to find that it still is. I set a cup of coffee in front of him. He wrapped both hands around it, as he had before. I sat with them for a while, then moved away to give them the morning to themselves. From across the room, I watched Harold drink his coffee and look out at the street, at the neighborhood that had changed. And kept changing all the years he had stayed away. He looked, I thought, like a man setting something down. Something heavy he had carried for a very long time. If this story moved you, I hope you will stay with it for just one moment longer. Harold's story is not one man's story. It is the story of everyone who has ever felt themselves become invisible. Not through any dramatic event, but through the slow accumulation of being overlooked. Of rooms that do not shift when they enter. Of eyes that do not meet theirs. Ellen did not do anything remarkable. A cup of coffee. A chair pulled out. A hand placed gently over trembling hands. Small things. Things that cost almost nothing. But for a man who had quietly given up on being seen, they were everything. We pass people every day who are carrying whole lifetimes we know nothing about. We move around them like water around a stone and never think to look. Ellen looked. Not out of obligation or pity. Just because she was a person. And he was a person, and something in her recognized that. That is all it took. That is, sometimes, all it ever takes. Thank you for staying with Ellen's story to the end. If it resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe. And share your thoughts in the comments. Until next time.